You are now listening to Femme podcast with Tessa Markle
and Carolina Alvarez.
Femme.
Hey, fam. So this season, like we said, is going to be a little bit different. We're going to be re-releasing some older episodes, but today we're bringing on a return guest. So brand new content with a guest that we had on season 2. You guys, this was 2019 when her career really blew up, and she has been booked and busy ever since. So today we are talking to Skye Borgman. She has been a director. She's been a producer. She's been a cinematographer, all around filmmaker. And she works in the documentary space, specifically true crime. And you probably know her from Abducted in Plain Sight, which really blew up. And in me and Carolina's opinion, really spiked the true crime doc obsession that the world has kind of had, on streamers and stuff ever since. So when we spoke to her in season 2, that was right after Abducted was, out and people were talking about it. Since then, she has been doing so much. You guys, I love true crime, and Netflix is kind of my go-to when I'm I don't know what I want to watch, because they already know what I like. I can't tell you how many times I've watched something and then it gets to the credits, first name up, Skye Borgman. I'm always yeah, Skye. So it's really exciting. I think we feel like proud, not parents, because we didn't have anything to do with it, but we're very proud of her. We're very excited for her. And some other shows and movies that you might recognize: Sins of Our Mother, Girl in Picture, I Just Killed My Dad, again, among many others. Check out her IMDb. She is doing so much. But today we really get to talk to her about, how her career has developed and how she chooses the projects that she does and what really goes into making a documentary, because, we understand that it's not just a script that you're acting out, right? There's a lot of data that has to be collected, interviews, all kinds of stuff like that. But in this episode, I think you and I both, Carolina, learned how much more goes into it than we even realized. So there's a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also very exciting. And we really get to talk to her about, why she's passionate about it and how she's gotten to where she is today. And she gives some really good advice.
Great advice. I think even if you are more of a narrative filmmaker like us, it's just awesome that for her, the first and foremost always goes back to the story. And I think the way you tell that story in a documentary, whether she breaks down the feature length version of it versus doing a 3-part series, it's so fascinating to us because we are all storytellers, and she is no different than, us in that sense, right? We're all trying to achieve that goal of telling the protagonist's journey, what they're going through and the empathy that she has involved for the victims. It's really touching and inspiring to see what she's been able to do. And yeah, impressive to say the least. So you guys are going to enjoy this episode. She's a superstar at what she does. So enjoy. Well, let's get right into it. Skye, welcome back to the show. God, we had you on season 2 of Femme podcast. We were babies. It was our first year. We were in the studio. We were playing actor improv games because that's where we started as actors. And what a blessing it is to reconnect with you again after a couple years. That was released 2019, July 2nd, 2019 was your episode. So listeners, you need to go back and tune into that episode. But where we had just left off on that conversation, you had just done Abducted in Plain Sight. It was, quote, the craziest documentary ever on Netflix. And it was, I feel like, the launch of what has become this documentary obsession that we all love to binge and hear from all these different stories. And yeah, so I want to definitely go back and touch a bit on that because that's how we met, and then catch up on what has been going on since then, because you've done quite a bit.
It doesn't seem like it's been that long, since I've seen you last. I mean, I think COVID had something to do with that for sure. You know, it's
Yeah.
sort of
Right.
this 3 year sort of just comma in and
Yeah.
Right. It felt like the 3 years was one, you
yeah.
know?
Yeah.
It's so wild. And yeah, we were in studio. It was a different time. It was a
Yeah.
completely different time.
Different time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, it's been exciting. I mean, with Abducted in Plain Sight, it was the first documentary that I'd really worked on that got a lot of sort of national and even international attention, and people were shocked by it. And it really just found a momentum that was a little bit unstoppable, you know. And it was just really
Mhm.
nice to, because there's so many movies that we work on, I mean, both of you know we work on movies and we're proud of them and we do good work, but they don't all necessarily sort of get the steam that we hope they get. And
Right.
so to
Right.
see Reflected kind of get the steam that it got was really, really exciting. And it led to a few opportunities. I mean, I got to know the people at Netflix and started out by doing a few episodes on series like Trial by Media and Unsolved Mysteries. And that was kind of my first
Oh,
sort of
wow.
getting into that Netflix family and doing shows that had showrunners overseeing everything, that were sort of
Right.
established entities. And then that kind of led to I was working with Oxygen. I did a couple of shows with Oxygen. I worked with Hulu. And so I was kind of out pitching shows all around. Production companies were coming to talk to me and seeing if I'd be interested in directing projects that they had. And then I really sort of found my family really at Netflix, and sort of these 3-part series or features that really are victim forward and survivor forward, and that look at crimes, that tell a story of how people survive them or how people get through them, and what a definition of a survivor is, and how we may sort of put them into this little box, but they're actually sort of a lot of different ways to look at trauma and to look at how people survive trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. I know when we
Yeah.
were talking about this season, like who to have on, and we were looking back at past guests, and I was like, "Oh, Carolina, you know what? Because I'm a true crime doc lover, and like when I don't know what I want to watch, I just go to Netflix. It's easy to search on there. They already know what I like, and I'll end up watching something. The credits come on, and sure enough, Skye, first name up. I'm always excited when I see that. So you obviously have been up to a lot, and you've been doing a lot of projects, and a question that we had, which I think you kind of just answered, but if you can kind of expand on it a little bit, is, how do you choose which projects to do? And you had mentioned it's really important to you that it's about the victim, and, you're getting to tell their story. Are there other things that you kind of look for? Have these kind of just, come your way, or did you search them out?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely victim forward stories. I certainly like stories that have some sort of female perspective in them. And let's face it, most true crime stories do, because most crimes are perpetrated against women. Some crimes are perpetrated by women. I'm interested in complexity, and really looking at why people do the things we do, what kind of the human perspective, I guess, and the human conundrum, really, and all of the different facets of that. You see in a lot of these crime stories the very best of people, and you also see sort of the very worst of people. And so, really being able to unpack that and look at why, or possibilities of why, a person may act a certain way, that's very interesting to me. Stories with different layers, I like that a lot. Not necessarily just kind of like a story that is pretty, I don't know, just kind of A equals B equals C. I like to be able to sort of have a story, but be able to go away from it a little bit, and
Mhm.
dive into some issues in a more sort of specific or deeper way. And so I think complexity really is one of the things I'm drawn to when I'm picking stories.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's like there's always more to than even what the crime was, like what actually occurred. There's always some other layer. And it's, of course, always comes at uh at the end of the day, it hurts the victim, of course, like, that's where it all leads to. But then it's like, well, okay, it's great to question, okay, why wasn't, there other steps to taken to prevent this, or why did it come from this other person to act in this way? It's always, I think, what I enjoy about true crime is understanding all those other surrounding details, and we can even feel bad for the perpetrator if it was an upbringing situation, which most of the time it is. And it's okay to empathize with their young self, I think. But then, of course, when the horrific acts are done, you're like, okay, well, that's still no excuse. We can all
Yeah.
find ways.
There's so many people who horrific things happen to who don't go on and commit horrific things.
Exactly.
So it's really, just being able to sort of look at all of the different facets and
Yeah.
not excuse anybody necessarily, but to try to explain, or at least come as close as we can to sort of exposing, I guess, some of the different variables.
Yeah.
I would love to know what your thoughts are on this, but I think for me, as also like a true crime doc and podcast like listener, to me it just comes down to the importance of raising a child and like how to really be there and nurture them. And sure, again, it's not always like nature versus nurture. It's that's where it gets interesting, I think, to like learn more about. But would love to see if like there's a common thing you've learned about, and it could, what your takeaway from it doing these kinds of stories are.
I mean, there's definitely a lot that you can look at in terms of a childhood and a person's childhood. I think when, I've done a few of these stories now and really sort of looking at different things, sometimes it's somebody's childhood, sometimes it's a trauma that happened in their life. I'd say more than maybe childhood, it's just trauma. It's something that has happened at some point that sort of severely changes the course of a person's life or their perspective or their family. And so I think that's really what it comes down to a lot. And oftentimes these crimes are, perpetrated in something like unsolved mysteries, for example. Like, we don't know exactly who the perpetrator might be. And we're looking at crimes that may be just sort of random. And so, kind of how can it still be something that we don't know, and looking at law enforcement and looking at our justice system and being able to sort of look at all of these different elements in terms of and our own sort of biases and how things can
Right.
sort of play out in that regard.
Yeah. I always think it's interesting too how popular true crime has gotten, and especially with women as the viewers. It's interesting because, you always hear people be like, well, most of the victims are women. Why do women love true crime so much? But there's so many layers to it. Like, I can remember being like 10 years old, staying home from school on like a snow day or a sick day or something, and watching the old Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack and being like, one of these days, I'm going to know this person. I'm going to solve this mystery. I'm going to call in. Okay, these mysteries, these crimes happened 15 years before I was born. I'm probably not solving them. But, it was just like getting in that, like, feeling like you were a part of the investigation, And for me as an adult, like, I'm very interested in psychology. So like serial killers and psychopaths and, sociopaths and stuff are very interesting to me. And that's kind of, I think, why I continued to be drawn to it. But it's just fascinating, like how, true crime has really taken the world by storm.
It has. I mean, it is interesting because I think that, there's crime has been sort of part of our consciousness and part of our fascination, I think, for centuries, really. And telling stories about crime and knowing what's going on, especially for women, as we try to sort of protect ourselves and know as much as we can about why crimes happen or how to be safe in certain circumstances. I mean, more than not, I would say the crimes are usually perpetrated upon anybody from people that they know. And I think we still sort of exist in this world where we're like afraid of the boogeyman or afraid of walking down the dark alley and being jumped by some stranger, when it really is, the person you're sleeping with. It's the person, you're sending your child to school with. It's the person, who is close to the family. And I think we still have a long way to go in sort of knowing or really, really deeply understanding that and really questioning sort of all of that. So I think there's such a great place, and I think that the crime and the telling of the stories of the crime definitely has a place, and it's exciting to me in a way because people still want to watch these crime documentaries, and they have for many, many years. But I do feel like within the past 5 or 10 years, they've kind of audiences are consuming them more, and the quality of them is getting higher, and the ability to sort of go out and tell a complete and complex story is more present. It's not that we're better at telling these complete and complex stories, but I think that networks understand that there's an audience out there and that people want to watch them,
Mhm.
and so they're providing opportunities for a lot more people to sort of come and tell these documentary stories, which to me is incredibly exciting. Not for the crime world necessarily, but for the documentary world. These are stories that people want, and they're asking for them.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something I was going to ask, and you kind of answered it early on with Abducted in Plain Sight. Like, was that how you got bonded with the Netflix family and was able to then establish a working relationship there and kind of prove like we got stuff going on in this space that
And
people
people
want
want
to
to watch
see?
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Netflix has always known that. I think they've known, how many people want to come and they've, been creating these shows, and maybe we're one of the first really to kind of to lift them up a little bit and put them in
Yeah,
premium space. Whereas,
totally.
you look at Oxygen, you look at Investigation Discovery. I mean, these networks have been around for a long time, and they've been delivering product like this for many, many, many years. So I think, it's been a pretty common thread and a very common theme with Netflix and my relationship. It was an introduction, I think, with Abducted in Plain Sight. And then it was sort of getting to know them and figuring out, if the work that I do and if the work that they want sort of align. And I think the more, years we sort of were working on projects together and chatting together and working on things, the more we started kind of going, okay, yeah, our sensibilities really, really do align. And it's turned into something really, really great where we have a little bit more of a shorthand. And I might, have a project come in to me from a production company, and they're interested in sort of taking it out and shopping it, and I can kind of tell within the certain confines of a project, like what might Netflix like about this, what do they want more of, what do they want less of, like how does this sort of fit with
Mm.
what my perception of what they're looking for is. And so
Mhm.
it's been nice to sort of just
Be in that pocket, like being able
be in
to
the pocket
like,
and kind of have a little bit of a sense of what they're looking for, and what other networks are looking for as well. I
yeah.
mean, I've worked with other ones too, and kind of have a sense of the different executives and how they work, from Netflix to Max to Oxygen to ID to Hulu, and so it's been nice to kind of just know what the different sensibilities are that go into each of these, and that's cool. I think, to work with
Yeah.
That's
a number of
no.
people.
It's
Yes,
huge.
that's
Yeah.
your producer hat, which I
Yeah.
want to touch on. So you wear a lot of hats: producer,
Mhm.
director, cinematographer. I'm sure the list goes on. That just to remind us, for Abducted in Plain Sight, were you in working already with Netflix, or did you already produce, direct, and shot it yourself, then pitched it? Just
But
because there is a big distinction there, we know
there is
that.
Yeah, that with Abducted in Plain Sight, it was an independent project. My production company, Top Knot Films, we produced it, and it was very low budget, and it took a long time to get it complete. I was the director, I was a producer, I was the director of photography, I was doing sound, I was doing a lot of the AE.
Right.
We did bring in an editor, to help us really put it together. But there was a lot that I was doing. I was, overall the finishing and a lot of different hats on that one. And then when that was complete, we went out onto the festival circuit, and we also got an agent at that point, a sales agent. And that sales agent was really able to kind of help us get it to Netflix and have them look at it and then acquire it after it had been complete.
That makes sense. Were you so you got your sales agent at the festivals. Were you at all looking into distribution before finding that agent, or you started purely with festivals?
I mean, we started purely with festivals. We were
Mhm.
looking at all different distribution models and different ways of distributing it. We were in a pretty fortunate position because we had sort of financed it all through my production company and through crowdsourcing. And
That's
so,
amazing.
yeah,
Congrats.
financer that we needed to pay back, right? So it helped
Right.
us a lot because there was no sort of ticking clock. There was no interest rates that were sort of being applied. Like we didn't have to rush to make any judgments. And the film took us about 4 years, really, from beginning when we first started talking about it to completion. And then I know that when Netflix bought it, they said they were interested, but that it was going to be another year before they could launch it on the platform. And so that was a question, like, do we want to wait a year? Do we want to go a different route? And we had sort of decided we wanted to wait that year and that we just continue on the festival circuit and
Oh, awesome.
keep sort of publicizing it and try to keep getting just this grassroots sort of very sort of local kind of momentum behind it. And I'm really glad we decided to do that because I do think that at the end of the day, when it came out, that there were little pockets of people kind of all over the country kind of talking about it, going, oh, this is the one that we saw at the festival. Let's tell our friends about it, or let's talk about it, or let's do this. And so I think that we were able to, from a very, very grassroots level, sort of create a little bit of, water cooler moments and word of mouth kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love that. That's kind of where Carolina and I are going to be very soon with our movie. So we're always curious, and I feel like that's kind of the ideal, really, because you get to do that festival route. You get to, I think there's something really special about festivals, even if they're small local festivals. It's like, you get the buzz going, you get people talking about it. It also feels good to get those accolades and everything, of course, too, and then knowing that, like, okay, a year from now, this is going to be on Netflix, and of course you don't know how it's going to do on there. Luckily it turned out to doing really well, but like, having that like in your future, knowing that you get to do the festival route in the in-between, I think that lined up really well.
Yeah. And look, I'm a lover of regional film festivals. I think a lot of people kind of feel like if they don't get into Sundance or Tribeca or South by Southwest, if they don't get into the big ones, then there's no hope. But I think the regional film festivals are just these little beautiful, pure gold mines of places. It's really about it's not so much about the business. It really is about the creators and the creativity and the community. And they're just such a wonderful place. People take care of you so well. And they're a great way to make connections. I mean, we would always joke when we were on the festival circuit, we'd sort of, see the same people at various different film festivals, and would always joke, they lived in New York and Los Angeles, a lot of them. And it's like, oh, okay, we have to come to Wichita, Kansas to kind of meet with people from New York, but it is a little bit true. You meet these people and you create these bonds and friendships that sort of go on for a long time. I'm still in contact with a lot of people that we were on the festival circuit with.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's and the fact that you went on, I feel like what we're learning too is, when it comes to PR and building, an audience, you as the filmmaker are solely responsible, truly. Like, it's your job to get out there. So again, like, I think a listener takeaway is, you just because they got it on Netflix, you're still doing the work behind promoting your film and building that community that is going to not only then just watch your doc, but follow you most likely and want to see the next things which you did, which, you went on to do Sins of Our Mother, Girl in the Picture, I Just Killed My Dad. Listeners, I'm sure some of you are fans out there of these. And I wanted to ask if you just kept, did you continue to wear multiple hats, or were you just sticking to your director hat at this point? And were you working in tandem with Netflix, or also having to still move on with your own production company to produce these docs? So tell us the tea.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different, in each one of the different docs, there's a little bit of a different cocktail that sort of goes into it, right?
Right.
For the most part, with the ones you mentioned, like Sins of Our Mother, Girl in the Picture, I Just Killed My Dad, those I was working with different production companies with those.
Oh.
A couple of them were co-pros. I think Girl in the Picture was a co-pro with my company, and they were doing all production services with that. But really, working Netflix is they were the ones that commissioned it. It changes things a lot, right? When a network comes in and when you're working with companies, because there's a budget from the beginning, and we all know that,
Yeah.
sort of get in on budget, you're also trying to get out on time, and you're really sort of managing, who you're hiring, how long you're keeping those hires on for, how long this is going to take, and having at least trying to have a reasonable assessment of, how long is it going to take to go out in the field? It's different for a feature than a 3 or 4 parter. And how long is it going to take in post? Are you doing all episodes simultaneously if it's a 3-parter or a 4-parter? Or are you having one editor sort of do all 4 of them? And so it's
The
really
math on that. Oh my God.
crazy. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. And it affects creative too, I mean,
Of course.
if you're spending longer in post, it's great to be able to have that time to sort of be able to really shift and change and mine the footage and do it. But there's also gets to be a fatigue factor too. And you get to a point where, you've spent so much time with it that you lose perspective. And so really sort of trying to figure out the best way to staff a project, the best time span to sort of do it in. And so you've got some, luckily when I'm working on these projects, I've got these incredible people who are pros in the business. And so there's a lot more support coming in, which there has to be, right? Because
Of course.
you have
Yeah.
to get it done within a certain amount of time. I mean, each one of those films that you just mentioned took approximately a year from the time we started production to the time we finished it. Then there's all of the prep stuff that we're doing. And then the finishing, which usually takes 3 to 6 months, sometimes, from the time we actually finish it or picture lock it to finish it to the time it comes on Netflix. That's anywhere between 3 to 6 months. So it's a lot of time.
Wow. Yeah.
It's substantially less than what Abducted in Plain Sight took us, because we never had that. Like, we never had a budget that we were trying to hit. We were just like, how much money can we raise and what can we get done with money? So it's a really different perspective.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, completely. Do you feel like you found your sweet spot now? Like understanding, the films I mentioned, they're not broken in parts, right? They're full length.
Girl in the Picture is a feature-length film.
Okay.
Filmmaker is a 3-parter, and I Just Killed My Dad is a 3-parter.
Okay. Talk to me with a little more about the 3-parter, because now I'm like, ooh, wait, this is a lot.
It's a lot.
What? Yeah.
I mean,
go on.
You're just, you have to think about, it becomes a lot. You're looking at story the same, essentially, right? I mean, you're looking at the sort of structure of the story. You're looking at where things happen. But with a multi-parter, you're looking at how each individual sort of episode begins and ends. And so that sort of changes it. But that structure within each episode needs to fit into the greater sort of episode of the three parts, right? I mean,
right.
You usually think of 3 parts, a 3-part series as 3 acts. So each episode is with a beginning, middle, and end, and each of those is sort of building to the last one. So you're thinking a lot about structure, but from a practical perspective, then you've got 3 editors and you're sort of editing multiple episodes simultaneously. So you really need to know where they start and where they finish, so that at least episode 1, you need to know that. And then so that the person working on episode 2 is sort of picking up the ball that they don't know how it's getting launched to them necessarily. And episode 3, like that ball is continuing getting pitched forward. And so there is just a little bit more, I don't know, maybe just knowing the structure a little bit more prep work to try to go in, so that you're not, if you have to blow up one episode in the edit, it's not completely sort of crashing the other 2, so that it can kind of be a little bit more manageable.
Wow. I did not even realize that. I mean, it makes sense because, you have a deadline that you have to hit and everything, but like all of that's going on simultaneously. And wow, that's a lot. I think that people, and I'm myself included, you think of like a mini series one of 2 ways. Either you think of it like TV, which is, you're like doing it in order and there's space in between and everything, or you're thinking of it like a just, feature film where it's like, you film it all and then it's just chopped up. But that doesn't work either, because like you said, you have to have like the arc in each episode. You know, it's not just to be continued. Like there's each episode is its own thing too. So yeah,
And
that's
it's
something I never really thought of.
Yeah, because I mean, the way that we used to sort of live through television is that, you tuned in at 7 o'clock on a Monday night and you'd watch the next episode of The Love Boat or whatever we were watching, when we were kids. And so that would come on TV, and other episodes of The Love Boat, like the final 23rd, I mean, there used to be 23 or so episodes in a season, and that last one wasn't shot and it wasn't cut. And so there's sort of, you're finishing one and it's airing, and you're finishing the next one, it's airing, you're finishing the next one and it's airing, so that over the course of a season, you can be finishing episodes while other ones are airing. But now, with streaming, it's just changed everything. If the streamers are putting out all of the episodes at one time, right? I'm dealing with 3 episodes. Sometimes I'm dealing with 4. I worked on something where I had 8 episodes. So all of those are being dropped at the same time. So you have to finish all of them and deliver them before anybody's even talking about it. So it does, the more episodes, it's like the more balls you're juggling up in the air.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't even imagine. And just when you said 3, and it's so easy, it's much easier to break it into a 3-act structure, like you said. So I can't even imagine like having to do more than 3. You're like, okay, what's the little sub, like, even, you have to go in further or find a different perspective to kind of share, I think, which could be fun. I feel like in those parts, like, do you find that you're kind of shifting between perspectives to then like have the audience understand one, storyline versus the other? Like
it changes. It changes from story to story. It changes, and a lot of times it's really just like, how much content is there to a story, and to really be able to sort of, put it down on paper and kind of figure out where, how each episode may look, and to kind of go, this was sold as a 4-parter. It could be a 5. Like there's enough content there that it could be a 5, or it might be stronger as a 3, or, but to look at the story and figure out, I always like looking at the story first to kind of figure out how big it should be, rather than kind of going, all right, 4 parts, how do we fill it? I like kind of going, okay,
I like that.
Story, how many parts serves the story best? So, but they're different.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it, because personally, I love a miniseries. Like sometimes when a season's like, old fashioned, I'll say, but like, 23 episodes long, I'm like, I might fall out of it or whatever. Or even just a movie, sometimes I get distracted. So if it's like nice little, 3 to 6 episode kind of thing, I'm like, cool, I can, take a break, come back, but I'm still like probably going to binge it. Like that's my favorite kind of thing. But every story has its own length of time that really works, and there have been some that I've seen that I'm like, man, I really feel like they could have just made this a feature film or like a 2-parter, and it is like, it's too much. They're dragging it out, so yeah.
Look, it happens sometimes, where little bits of the story sort of fall apart, or you learn something amazing when you're out in the field and you're finding another little bit to the story. So it's always, that's part of what I love about documentary too, is that it is constantly fluid. It's constantly changing, and you continue to learn things as you move through.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Are you a fan of, and would you ever see yourself doing, like I don't know if this is the right word for it, but like dramatization of a true crime? Like first thing that comes to mind is The Staircase, where they had like the documentary and then they had like the fiction, version of it that still followed the story.
They did the same thing with Bundy, right? Like the Ted Bundy case. And I absolutely could see something like that. I love stories that are based on reality. And so take something and do a scripted version of it, I think could be cool, because there's certainly stories that I've researched and thought about as a documentary that just get to a point where it's like, it's just not feasible to do it as a documentary because of whatever reason. Like there can be hundreds, right, that you can't get the access, or that nobody wants to talk, or that it's just too out there. You can't, I don't know. There's all sorts of different reasons why it may not work. And so to do something in a scripted format, or even to take something like a True Detective or something in this crime space, or to me, the series Unbelievable, that where you're following these two real detectives that has a foot in reality, but that is dramatized. I could absolutely see doing something like that.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
As a director, then going back to that, I just do again trying to do the mental math here. So when you have these episodes, are you on location shooting, then like going back to the editing bay? Are you trying to shoot everything one chunk so you have everything and then heading off to editors? What's the workflow there?
Again, it changes.
Oh
It
my
changes
gosh.
from every story. I mean, I'm working on a couple, sort of last year and this year, so far this year, where like one of them is like we go out for 4 or 5 days and come back, and go out for 4 or 5 days and come back. And really, the big question is, when is the best time to start post? Because that's when things start. When the train kind of
Right.
leaves the station, and there's not really much stopping it, or else it starts to get expensive, right? So
Right.
to be able to have enough for the editors to sort of come in and start cutting it, and then to continue shooting if we need to. There's other ones where I've gone out for 3 weeks or a month and filmed everything and come back, and then we start post at that point. I
Okay.
usually always really like to sort of preserve 2 or 3 days of filming for pickups, so that once we get into the edit and we're going, oh, we really need this to sort of transition us into this, or we need something, or we need an interview with somebody different, so that we can really sort of explore this in a bigger, sort of more intricate way, that we've got 2 or 3 days that we can set aside and kind of go, okay, let's go back out and get this. But that's really comes into play once we've got, a rough cut or a rough cut 2 or something, where people are, where we're getting feedback at that point, or we're kind of sitting there going, we've tried to fix it, or we've tried to explore this in a couple of different ways, and we really need to go back and shoot something else.
Wow.
I have a question on budget too. Like, so working with Netflix and having, their budget, their deadline, how is that budget really, I guess, determined is my question. Like, is that something that is, in the pitch meeting with the production company, whether that's you or an outside production company, that's like, okay, this is the budget we need, and they go back and forth with Netflix? Or is Netflix kind of like, okay, we want this project, here's what we're going to give you? Like, who kind of makes those decisions?
I mean, it's a conversation, and it's an always evolving conversation, right? It's usually never happens in the pitch, right? The budget is never talked about really in the pitch, but the creative elements are talked about. Like, how do you see this project sort of playing out? Are there, at least in my experience with documentaries, is there a lot of archive? Is there a lot of recreations that you're seeing? Who do we have access to? I mean, that's always a big one, is who is going to be telling this story.
Right.
And then if they're interested, then a lot of conversations sort of then start happening, kind of going, is it budget's going to be different if it's a 3 or 4 parter than it is if it's going to be a feature film? Is it what formula sort of a documentary is it? If it's something where, we're just doing sort of sitting down and talking with interviews with people and then filling everything else in with B-roll and recreations, it's dramatically different than if we're doing a follow doc where we're following an active investigation that's sort of playing out. And it takes a lot more time because you've got to spend all this time with the people, and you've got different sort of trigger points that maybe something's going to happen here, something's going to happen here, something's going to happen here. So it really is, looking at what kind of a project it is. Is it other recreations period? Are they, modern day? And so the budgets sort of are, once creative, and you start having these creative conversations about how it's going to look, then that's when you start putting the budget together. And it's a conversation, always evolving.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
To go back to the editing, when you were talking about how like you've structured it for these pickup days, do you know already like with the footage that you have and kind of knowing maybe a little bit how much archive footage you're going to also use, how do you give that to the editor to do a rough cut? Do you have something outlined? Because it's not really scripted, our editor, can follow a feature-length script, but in the documentary case, is there a script or some sort of outline? How do you deliver that?
It's a pretty specific outline. At least this is
Okay.
how I work. I like to go into the field with an outline. So having talked to the participants, having done, a lot of research into what the story is, I go in and it's a pretty detailed outline of what we're hoping to get from this scene and this scene and this scene and this scene, and or what we need them to talk about, and how we get from this story point to this story point. And then that outline, once we come back from being in the field, changes dramatically because of everything that we've learned when we're out. And so,
Yeah.
and of stories or new things that we learned that I'm constantly thinking, oh, could this be a cold open, or this could be our turning point that happens here, or this could be a great cliffhanger for this episode, or however something that they tell me sort of changes my perspective on things. And so then it's coming back, and then that's when things start happening. Well, I mean, it's the next step of things happening simultaneously because the footage is getting ingested and the project is getting built. And usually myself and a producer, story producer possibly, are going through and looking at what we have in interview and in verite and in B-roll and kind of restructuring the outline. Then that outline, and it's a rough outline.
Okay.
I'm usually not pulling quotes from things and
Okay.
putting them in the outline. I'm kind of saying, that this is how the story is going and kind of what the point of the scene is. Like, we want to see, how vulnerable this person is because we've just learned about something that happened in their family. And so kind of the elements of the scene that go in there and why we're cutting this scene in to where we're cutting this scene. And then it really is handing it over to the editor. And typically on the projects now, there's a producer that's working with that editor, who's got a sense of the story, who's got a sense of the archive. And I like having all the archive ahead of going into the field as well. Or
I was wondering. Okay.
archive,
Yeah.
because it informs so much. And if it's an archive heavy show, like Sins of Our Mother was a very archive heavy show. There was a ton that we had. And so we needed to kind of know, but that case was also sort of unfolding as we were filming. And so we were getting new archive as archive was coming out. So that we were always kind of chasing it. But to have a sense of the archive that's out there, or that there's going to be a lot, and that either law enforcement's going to give it to us or we're going to be able to acquire it somehow is a good thing to be able to know as you're going in to edit. But then it's like
that makes sense.
He or she is doing kind of what they do. They're cutting these scenes together, and then I'm watching them, and we're sort of starting to shape it and craft it as we move through.
It just seems so much to like wrap my head around, to be in that position where it's like you can do all the research ahead of time, gather as much archive and everything as you can ahead of time. And like, even if it is, not necessarily a case that's like still unfolding that you're following, which that, I mean, sounds like its own animal. Even if it is really just kind of like interviews and archive, like you're still probably going to discover something that you didn't think of or you didn't realize or whatever. Like, it's so much to kind of wrap your brain around because, when you have like a narrative script, it's like, what's going to happen. And sure, something could end up happening that surprises you on set, and that's great too. And, but it's,
for the most part,
like a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cutting scenes, really, or maybe you're going back to reshoot a scene, but it's different. I mean, it's a different process that happens, and it's a longer process because you're you're really working with the story. You're not creating the story, and you're working with real people, and in my case, I'm working with real people who have probably suffered severe trauma. And so it's being really careful with them and being really communicative with them and taking time. And that's something that, in production, a lot of times it's just like, go, 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 go. You got to go fast. You got to go fast. And to really kind of get into a cadence where you don't have to go fast. You just need to work at the pace that you need to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk to us about what it's like working with these victims and how you're able to, it sounds like from what you said that you kind of know already ahead of time who's agreed to speak to you, but is that 100% like everyone? Are you still trying sometimes to get feelers out from other like family?
I mean, like we know a lot of people who are going to talk to us absolutely ahead of time. Many times more people sort of surface who have perspectives of the story to tell. So it's always fascinating. Look, it's why I love documentaries, is because I get to meet some of the most incredible people I've ever met, and I will always believe that everybody has a story to tell, and the bravery it takes for people who have suffered incredible trauma is outstanding. The bravery, and I always feel so honored when I'm sort of let in to people's lives and that they trust me enough to tell their stories. And so it's part of it is absolutely my favorite part of working in this genre, is being able to meet and spend time with the people who tell their story publicly.
Yeah. I think that's a really beautiful way to look at it.
Yeah.
Do you have anything in the works or in mind of a project that you're looking forward to doing? I mean, I know a lot of projects are, presented to you from other production companies, for instance, and stuff, but is there anything you particularly are passionate about that you have on the horizon?
There's many projects that I'm constantly looking at different stories. I'm constantly looking at different ways to tell these stories. I mean, just recently, The Truth About Jim came out on Max, and that was, looking at 3 generations of women who have suffered a family trauma and kind of looking at how they get through it. And so it's really, look, I like working on stories that are survivor forward, like we've said, right? But also ones that are different. Like I don't always want to be working on exactly the same story. I want to be able to sort of expand my understanding of humanity as well. And that's really important to me, that it's not just, telling stories that are exactly the same as the one I've done before. So
Yeah.
there's a lot. Look, there's a lot that I'm constantly looking and researching and reading and talking to people, and I'm really interested in everyone's stories.
That's another question too that I just kind of realized. How like when you hear about these crimes that are committed, these stories that happen, like, it's one thing if someone brings it to you, again, in like another production company, but is it just things that you've come across in the news? Like, do you go somewhere to find, like, how do you end up kind of finding these stories?
There's so many different ways. I mean, people email me a lot. I read books. I listen to podcasts. I mean, it's like they kind of come from every direction, and I don't think there's any one way. I mean, I think because there's so much more sharing happening now. Like, there's so many different places to get content. I think that their stories can come from just about any direction.
Yeah,
that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And of the stories you've told, is there one that like you hold near to your heart that you feel like you learned so much from about, humanity, like you spoke about, or you just really not enjoyed is not the right word, but you felt like it was the one you're most proud of, the way you were able to tell it, or how you connected with it?
Yeah, they all hold something very different, I mean, I think Abducted was kind of the one that felt like it launched my career in a way, and it also felt like one that was like very much mine. Like there were, other people who were working on it, but it just felt like it was mine. And
it was yours, girl.
I know.
It was.
The other ones that you start to work on, I mean, I love Girl in the Picture because I felt like it was just such a, I don't know, it was such a tragic, hard story to tell, but that it had this kind of beautiful ending to it. And there's a way to sort of have it be something that wasn't just awful all the time, And so I think that one was also a great one that I loved. But Sins of Our Mother was kind of crazy, and it was happening all at the same time. And this story that we didn't really know the ending. We didn't know what was going to happen. And so
Wow.
something really exciting about that one. And then,
I need to watch that one. I haven't seen
yeah,
that
I
one
mean,
yet.
and
Okay.
it's still going on. Like there's still,
Mhm.
Chad Daybell is going to be going to trial soon. Lori was on trial last year. And so there's still things that are unfolding in that story that we weren't
Mhm.
able to tell because they hadn't happened yet. So
Wow.
all of them
Yeah.
have something different and something wonderful.
Yeah, that always amazes me too when I'm watching like a true crime doc that's like, so and so had their trial and it's like, 6 months earlier than this just came out. And it's like, oh my God, like I can't even wrap my head around how quick they had to do all of that. But you have to, like that's, and especially when a story breaks, it's like the first really good doc out about it is going to be the one that people remember, right? So you want to kind of get your foot in the door as quickly as you can, but man,
Yeah.
I'm always like, I don't know how they did it.
It's tricky because it's like targeting that time period where you've got enough information to tell the most accurate, most ethical story
Mhm.
possible hopefully without influencing people if there's going to be a jury. Like there's a lot of ethical conversations that sort of come into play, and a lot of if you're going to be the first, are you going to be the best, or is it worth it to wait a little bit more and to be able to have a little bit more of a complete story? So
Mhm. Yeah.
it's a lot of conversations that start to go on about, do you want to tell the most complete and wait a little bit, or do you want to be the first to the table? And it's different. It changes all the time.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to a filmmaker looking to break into the doc space? And like in terms of, getting they obviously maybe have a project in mind, not like, oh, I just want to try documentary. Like I kind of feel like if you're leaning towards that space, there must be a story you want to tell. But if there's, what kind of advice would you give to that person who
I mean,
wants to break in?
I think it's really do your research, and not just from a story perspective. Like if we're really talking about the business of documentaries, right? Like creating a sort of sustainable, lasting career in this storytelling medium, I think it really is, look at what's being made, look at what's doing well, look at, watch it with a very specific eye, figure out why people love it, even if it's, a genre that you don't really love. Why is this genre doing well? What's being produced out there? And then to really sort of go out, and if there's a story you have that fits into a genre, because it's all going to fit into a genre. Nobody's going to create a genre, I don't think, in documentary films right now.
Mhm.
Is it crime? Is it social justice? Is it political? Is it feel good? Like there's something that is going
Yeah.
to fit into, and just kind of see who's making those films, from the production companies to the networks, and really look at what's in the marketplace, and see if there's a place that you could go to sort of get your documentary out into the greater public.
I've actually never thought about breaking it down into these various genres, which probably makes sense when you were saying, like, I don't want to just do one kind of story to tell
Yeah.
out there. There's
Mhm.
all
Yeah.
these different genres.
Well, it's funny
That's very
because
helpful to think
even
about
when I
that.
made like Abducted in Plain Sight, I didn't actually realize, like, this is great advice. I didn't take it myself when I was doing it. I didn't realize it was a true crime documentary.
Mhm.
I was like,
What?
okay, this is a documentary about
Oh.
a woman who was abducted twice, but I didn't realize it was true crime. Like it didn't have murder in it. It didn't have
Yeah.
all this stuff. I thought it was,
True.
sexual abuse. And so then when it sort of became, everybody was thinking about it within this true crime genre, I was like, oh, okay. Because everybody told me, when I was trying to sell it, they're like, nobody wants to watch a movie about a pedophile.
Mm.
It's like, oh boy, this could be bad. Like, but
I
it was in a time too, like Me Too was just starting,
Uh-huh.
I mean, and docs were coming out, and we were starting to talk about sexual abuse in a much more public way. And there was just, it was good timing that it took as long as it did for us to finish that
Mhm.
thing. Or else it could have gotten buried. It could have gotten buried.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Definitely. I mean, because I find even if you're literally just kind of like reorganizing your view on it, that's going to lead you down the right path. Even if it doesn't change your like, I don't know how to say this, like your to-do list of, like where you're focusing on all of that, like it's going to restructure that anyway. Just having the right, frame and mindset of what this movie is, where it needs to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you were saying, like timing just plays a huge factor in all of this in the broad sense. So I think it's like even as on narrative titles, like take, everything happens when it needs to happen, and that's kind of the unknown, but also really it usually is a rewarding thing once you reach, a certain point, or helps you decide, like, is this the project to take on right now?
Exactly.
What's kind of the temperature right now out there? And like you said, with the Me Too movement, oh my God, no, that totally makes sense.
And more than anything,
it was so revealing.
You're trying to decipher what the temperature is going to be in a year and a half. Like, it's not where it is now. Because it's like, everybody's like, oh my God, okay, Tiger King is huge. Let's make another Tiger King. And it's like, Tiger King is huge because like we've never seen anything at this moment in time.
Right.
In a year and a half or 2 years, like, it's gonna be old news. So it's like figuring out what, more of like what the nucleus of it is that people love about anything that's sort of zeitgeisty at the time, and then kind of going, all right, and how does that fit within any individual person's perspective, I guess, and what they want to be making. Like, nobody should ever just go out and sort of try to make another blockbuster because something hit. They need to make something that they really care about. But how does it fit within this world, and finding the place where it fits and trying to sort of move towards that.
Yeah.
That's why I love independent film, baby. We do that. We do that. Hello, Disney. It's just like, so true. And it's, again, it's awesome to see how that still correlates in the documentary space. Like, there is such a way about going it that it's like, I think it's like watch and definitely observe and really pay attention, but it's not about replicating it like that, but understanding the structure, right? And then how does it apply with your story? I think. Ooh, that is great, Skye. We love
advice,
that.
For
that
sure.
Is some good advice. Down to the story. We love going back to the story.
Yes.
Let's go back to the story. Yeah.
It's your compass. That's what we say. It's your compass to anything.
Whenever you get lost, just go back to the story. Whenever you're just like, what is going on? Just kind of try to strip away all the shit and just get back to the story.
That's where I'm at with Post right now on Sync. It's like,
it's hard to do that because you just get in the weeds, and it's hard.
You get real in the weeds after watching it like 10 million times, and you're like, okay, what do we still that? So I love that. I love that advice so much.
Yes. And Skye, we mentioned several projects that our listeners can watch on Netflix and other networks. But where can they find and follow your work? If that's social media, website, however you'd like to share.
Website. I've got skyeborgman.com, and I've got topknotfilms.com, which is kind of under construction right now. But I'm lousy at social media. But people can reach out to me on Instagram. It's just Skye Borgman, and Facebook, Skye Borg. I mean, it's just my name.
Okay.
I'm, like I said, I'm terrible at it, but talk to me. It might take me a while to get back to you, but you can get me.
Well, girl, you're busy.
Understandably so. I mean, as long as they can like know you, follow your work, that's a great space to check out your website. We'll definitely plug that all in because it's really awesome stuff, and we're such huge fans. So thank you again for taking the time to hang out with us, catch up, and like now that we have fresh off Post, it was really fun to kind of like explore how you were able to parse all these different elements in various forms that are not alike.
Yes.
Which must be so much fun for you, Skye. You're like, all right, let's get it going. Oh, but we're so happy to hear that you are booked and busy and like
Yes.
just so many amazing things. We are, yeah, if there is a project on the horizon that we need to know about, that's what we're here for. So let us know.
Yeah.
And congratulations to you for your film. I'm so excited to get to see it when it's finally ready for
Thank
the masses.
you.
Thanks for listening to Femme Regard Podcast. If you like what you hear, tune in every Friday for more tips on the filmmaking business and insightful conversations with industry professionals. We can only grow with your support, so please subscribe, share, rate, and review. You can also join the Femme Fam on Patreon. For more on us, check us out at femregard.com.